So let me remind you that next month we will hear from former Marine Nick Swagger, class of 1999, who will give a presentation entitled From the Blake School to the Department of Defense Ambassador and Back Again, making the transition in and out of the U.S. military in the global arena. And then take a few months off, and in August we'll hear from Ann Stavney, who will share her thoughts on the state of the Blake School over at Gayeton level. Well, today we have the pleasure of hearing from Douglas Gayeton. Thanks to a generous grant from Blake alums, Margaret and Angus Wordle, who established the Philip Otis Environmental Authors Program. Douglas is spending this week teaching and interacting with students and faculty on all three Blake campuses. And apparently he has totally thrilled the kids in pre-K by telling them that the most important thing about chicken is that they are happy chickens. He's kept them all laughing, he's kept them all entertained, and he's going to do the same for us today. Douglas is an artist, a filmmaker, a writer, photographer, and author. Mediums he has used to share his ideas on sustainable agricultural practices, organic farming, the local food movement, and the slow food movement. So from Petaluma, California, where he lives with his wife, Laura, and daughter, Tulare, and here to talk to us today about the real cost of cheap food is Douglas Gayeton.
Good job. I want you to imagine that you're walking down the street and you have a person who you've never met come up to you and they ask you to close your eyes because they're going to put something in your mouth. You're laughing, but that's what you did this morning. You just ate food from people that you might have never met. You definitely don't know where it came from, and you don't know how it got here. And that's our food system. It's totally, completely opaque. And now if I know somebody, and they know me, and I'm growing food, for example, I'm going to be more liable to actually think about what it is I'm growing and what it is I'm giving them, because I actually can see them. But what about a food system that's completely opaque, where you don't know anybody in it? What happens to accountability or responsibility? This is what the Bible used to look like. It was in Latin, and the only way that you could actually understand what was in it was by having the priest tell you. It was a monopoly on information. So this guy, I call him poor John Wycliffe, thought, what if I get a bunch of people together, we translate it into English? What would happen? Well, I can tell you what happened to him. Not only did he have a very tortured rest of his life, but even after he died, they dug up his bones and they crushed them and they burned them and they put them in a nearby river. So much did they want to eradicate even the idea that you would actually translate the Bible into a language people can understand. Fortunately, today, we don't have that problem. Or do we? Unless you're a scientist, you're not going to be able to tell me anything in that, what's called in the food trade, ingredient deck on a loaf of bread. I have a 9-year-old daughter. She has a pretty simple rule when she sits in the grocery cart, arbitrating what goes in and what doesn't go in. If she can't pronounce the ingredients on the deck, she doesn't want to put it in. A 9-year-old. What does a 9-year-old know that we don't, right? She also has the 5-ingredient rule. Why does there need to be more than 5 of something in anything? Why are all those things in a loaf of bread? The problem is that we don't know what's in our food or even how to pronounce what's in our food. We don't even have the language or the words to explain it. But it's something that we can do something about. So my wife and I, 7 years ago, said, what would happen if we actually collected all of those words, all of those terms that explain what a sustainable food system is, which is a daunting process to go through, made more daunting because Nobody knows what the word lexicon is, as it turns out. So a lexicon is a collection of words, right? If you're going to talk about basketball, you can't really talk about basketball unless you talk about a dunk or a three-point shot. Or we're, in my house, Stephen Curry, right? So if you're going to talk about sustainability in agriculture, you need to know the words. You know, words are the building blocks for ideas. You and I can't have a conversation if we don't have the same words in common. If I'm talking about things and you don't know those words, you're going to tune out. And that's actually a problem, it turns out, with the climate change movement. People heard things like carbon debt and carbon trading. They never knew what it meant. The first time they were kind of curious. That sounds interesting, trading carbon, debts of carbon. But when they didn't know what it meant the 20th time, they actually had permission to check out of the conversation. And that's called climate fatigue. When you've heard something that you didn't understand so many times, you've literally just tuned it out. So what we did was we went around the United States, conducted hundreds of interviews with people all over the country, and said, what is it that you know that you can tell me? And you've seen some of the images that they have here that are the result of that journey that we went on. And usually at about this point, there'll be about a third of the audience is like, well, I came, I definitely got a breakfast, I got to meet some friends, but now those guys talking about words, and that's kind of pretty boring. But the thing is that words are actually super powerful. You can actually change aspects of our food system if you just learn a word. Just by learning one word. And I'm going to give you two examples. I could give you 100, but I'll give you two. Monsanto had this great idea to actually introduce a product that would actually increase milk production in dairy cows. It was a growth hormone. Worked really well. But you're giving a growth hormone to a dairy cow that produces milk that you're then having people drink. And it's a really great concept if you have an opaque food system that people actually don't understand and they can't actually know that there's a growth hormone going into their milk. But then one farmer in Ohio said, well, actually, hang on a second. I don't actually want to put a growth hormone in my milk because I actually know these people that are buying my milk and they've been buying my milk for my family for 5 generations. So I'm going to put on my milk carton that I don't use as growth hormone. What happened to this dairyman? He got sued by Monsanto, not for what was in his milk, but for what wasn't in his milk. What happened was, he suddenly found out he wasn't alone. Other dairymen said, you know, actually, I don't use this either. And others started to, even though there was a lawsuit going, others started to put this on their milk cartons. And the result was, this lost, like Monsanto's case lost in Ohio's highest court. And Monsanto ended up selling that part of their business. And now, for the most part, the majority of milk in this country actually is not actually produced by cows that are given growth hormones. The first time I heard the term cage-free, I had no idea what it meant, but I don't know. I thought, oh, chickens are in cages? Wow. I probably want to buy an egg that's not from a chicken in a cage. I don't know if it's going to taste better, but I think I'd like to buy that cage-free egg. So I started buying cage-free eggs. Turns out I wasn't alone. Suddenly, people all over the country started buying cage-free eggs. Then they started buying free-range eggs and then pasture-raised eggs. And all of a sudden, you had an entire movement of people, and now you have entire companies, entire food chains saying, you know, we're only going to have eggs from chickens that aren't raised in cages. All because people learned a word and were able to actually vote according to their values. And it's a problem because what we do in this country is we participate in the cheapest food system on the planet. Since the Second World War, almost every aspect of our food system has been consolidated, and we've used this principle of economies of scale to create the cheapest food. But how have we benefited? I mean, is there any connection between having the cheapest food in the world and the highest healthcare costs in the world? Like, are they connected? Which I'll get to in a second. I'll give you a hint, yes, but we'll get to it in a second. We know that we're in a rigged system. We know that corn in this country is grown, subsidized by your tax dollars, cropped up by crop insurance that's paid for by your tax dollars. And it's a rigged system where all of the costs of that production aren't totally reflected in the price. There's what's called external costs, all of the impacts, which could be environmental costs, could be the labor costs that we end up paying for people who don't have health insurance. It could be the medical costs. And there's actually a movement around the world to actually figure out what the real cost of cheap food is. And that's called true cost accounting. And it might not be something that is talked about now, but 2 years from now, you're going to remember that I told you that. And you're going to remember that suddenly there's going to start being an accounting of anything that you buy, what the real cost of that is. Because these are all costs that we pay eventually. And I'm going to give you an example. Alexander Hamilton created the first industrial park in the United States. He did it at the end of the 1700s on a river called the Passaic River in New Jersey, the second tallest waterfall after Niagara. It's really amazing. He chose that because of the power of that river. So all of the original Colt pistols, all of our original factories making locomotives, all of our original loom mills were all on that river, harnessing the power of that water, and then pumping all of their crap back into the river on the other side of the waterfall. So it's no mystery that 200 years later, it became one of the first EPA Superfund cleanup sites. We all pay for the externalized costs that make things cheaper. And we might pay in a day or a week, or in this case, we might pay hundreds of years later, but we all pay. And so it's why it's so important to understand what are the real costs of things. You all know in the room that something's not quite right when you're getting a 79-cent taco. Like you just know. You know that intuitively. I don't even need to explain this to you. It's because we have a rigged system that rewards people for producing things as cheaply as possible. I always go around the country, people always ask me, how do you come up with all these words that go on the pictures? I wish I could tell you that I come up with those words. It would make my life a lot easier. I made a very stupid decision in the very beginning, which was, what if I let people tell me what was going to go on the picture? And it was all going to be their words. It sounded really great in theory, so if you plan to do this, that's the one part you shouldn't do. Because I've had some images where for a year I've argued with people over just 5 words on something. I was with this one cattleman who was explaining to me how impossible it is to actually raise cattle in this country. And he said, well, it's the cow to pickup truck index. Well, I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. And he says, well, every cattleman knows what that is. I said, I don't. So it's hard to read, so I'll tell you. In 1985, you could get a pickup truck for $3,800. And the price of a coal cow was about $480. You flash forward 30 years later, that same pickup truck is $51,000. But that coal cow was only $800. So he just looked at me and he said, do the math. And I said, I don't need to do the math. I need to ask you why you're doing this. Why are you trying to raise your cows on pasture? Because economically, he's in a rigged system where he's competing against cows that are raised on industrial feedlots only eating corn, that are on antibiotic diets. So it's a rigged system. If you want to actually be a steward of your land and your water, raise something that's very high in omega-3s and 6s, the best possible product you can, you're in a rigged system where consumers will never know what you did because the system is so opaque, they'll never understand the value of what you've done because they don't even know the words that you're trying to use to explain what you're doing. Because in the end, it comes to a power of values. All of these images I've shown you are about people's value systems, about one value system over another, which one was going to win. And people are very polarized by GMOs. I was told that there might be Cargillites in the room. I should maybe show this image. I was speaking in Massachusetts, and I was talking about GM crops, and I kept going on about GM crops, and finally one man stood up and said, I'm sorry, but I'm gobsmacked by what you've just talked about tonight. I had no idea that General Motors was making food. We're not at the lexicon of sustainability, which I've just told we're videotaping this, so I should say it's actually not me, it's also my wife. We do it together. And our 9-year-old helps us out as well. I'm not here to say that I'm against GMOs. It's not I have a personal view but I don't need to give you my personal view. All I need to say is that wouldn't it be awesome if we actually knew it was in our food, and if there was a genetically modified product in my food, that you would just put it on the label, and then I could decide. And then consumers can make those decisions themselves according to their values, like people have done in all previous centuries until today. And also because I don't like to give opinions about GMOs, because people usually get GMOs, I think, wrong. I'm going to make it very simple in terms of how we explain GMOs. Companies like Monsanto create genetically modified organisms. We'll use corn as an example. And they own the technology and they own the intellectual property that's made. They're owning life forms. They also make it impossible to reuse seed after you've actually used it. You actually have to sign contracts. Secondarily, it's sold with Roundup, with a glyphosate. So you're actually buying a delivery mechanism that's actually for glyphosate. And we all know, or we're starting to learn more and more, about all the environmental problems created by glyphosate. So there's problems with GMOs, mainly because they all are, in some way, in an industrial way, connected to the use of glyphosates. So even if you don't want to talk about genetic engineering, do we want to have plant life owned by corporations? Do we want to support that precedent? And do we want to have a system where a very noxious chemical like glyphosates is dependent on this GMO? At the same time, GMOs can be very, very powerful. This is a ring spot virus papaya. This man on the right, Dennis Gonsalves, was a Hawaiian USDA scientist, and he heard that the papaya in Hawaiian Islands was being wiped out by the ring spot virus. He went back and created a GMO papaya, called a press conference, gave all the seed away for free, and saved the entire industry on the Hawaiian Islands. No privatization of the GMO that he created, and wiped out a virus. It's been there for 20 years. Anti-GMO advocates can never actually explain if there's been any negative consequences. This is always the exception to the rule. So why would I show you this if I'm not a supporter of GMOs? Because I think it's important to know that people don't really understand GMOs. It's a very, very volatile issue. And I can give you examples of cases that even anti-GMO advocates will say to you, actually are cases where it's actually saved industries. It's the third largest agricultural industry in the Hawaiian Islands. It's also value systems for farmers. The farmer on the right, there's nothing growing because, as the farmer on the left told me, he decided to take the season off. The farmer on the left looks crazy and cacophonous because it's a biodynamic farm. And the value systems between those two farmers couldn't be more different. These value systems apply not only to consumers, but to producers. But producers produce what consumers buy. We've talked about grass-fed cattle. We've talked about all the attendant problems that relate to the dairy industry. It might surprise you to know that 70% of all of the antibiotics produced in the United States actually aren't given to people. They're actually given to animals. But what's more startling about that is that they're given to animals that aren't even sick. So why would they do that? Well, it turns out that one of the byproducts of giving antibiotics to an animal is that it actually gains weight. And since animals are sold according to weight, it's actually a pretty cheap way to actually put weight on an animal. But those are antibiotics in meat that you're actually eating, right? And the other thing is that when you give antibiotics in such a careless way to animals, they build up antibodies. And those antibodies created tremendous problems for us in our U.S. health system. The only way we're going to actually get antibiotics out of our food system is if people shop according to their values. Just like what happened with RBST, just like what happened with the cage-free egg. And I can probably tell you that within 2 years, we're not going to be seeing antibiotics in our meat system anymore because of people like you simply realizing that there was this one term that they didn't know before. The same thing we see in fisheries, people wanting to know where their fish comes from. How many people in this room have ever had red snapper? No, probably didn't, sorry. Oceana did a study 2 years ago. They went around the United States, 13 cities, tested red snapper in restaurants, grocery stores, sushi bars? I think it was almost 80% of the time it actually wasn't red snapper. That's because we actually have no traceability of our fish. And so people are voluntarily now realizing the challenges of maintaining the fisheries and not overfishing. So they're actually putting tags on fish right when they come out of the water and having those tags go all the way through until it's sold at a store. So the next time you go to your fishmonger or the fish department of your store, you actually will finally have something to say to them that you've never actually, which is, do you know the traceability of your fish? And oddly, they probably are starting to. And I would imagine in 2 or 3 years, this will become almost commonplace in most cities across America. It all started with consumers demanding to actually know where their fish came from. When I come to communities like this, people always say, well, is it more important to have organic food or local food? And I always say both. And if you can't have both, then choose one. And when I was in the South, they actually gave me a term I didn't know, which was local first certification. And I said, well, if you're not organically certified, how are you certified? And they said, we have face certification here. We actually know who grows our food. For things that you can't buy locally, we certainly are not going to buy coffee locally. We're certainly not going to buy salmon locally. There's a principle called the connected market. I was sent up to Yakutat, Alaska, and this woman here, Shannon, this gillnet fisherman, I was sent there because it's the most sustainable way to fish for salmon in the world. What they do is they go up the Situk River, and they put a weir across the river, which is these series of poles that allow water to get through but nothing else. And they have a person, there was a salmon counter, who just sits there for 12 hours a day counting every salmon that goes through the hole. And they know that for sockeye, for every 3.1 that go through, you can actually catch one at the bottom of the river and maintain the viability of that population. So literally in real time, they're radioing to the bottom of the river saying, okay, we can take up this many today. And then they're down at the base of the river, which is called the terminus, and they're actually pulling fish out of the water according to that number. So I went up there to make this image called the terminal fishery, because it explains this amazing concept. But Shannon said she was very, very unhappy with this term. And so because I'm stuck with this stupid rule that I told you that I can actually put the words on these images, and I was trying to convince her for 3 days. We finally got to the airport in Yakutat, and I went through security, which means that I basically went through the x-ray thing and then turned around and went back and continued my conversation with her. She said, I don't really want you to call it that. I want you to call it a connected market. And I said, why? She said, well, the thing about it is that people always talk about all these values about, buying things where they can see the person and they can connect to the food that's around them. And you can't have that relationship with everything everywhere. We have to think of the world as a connected market where we actually, even from things that come afar, can have some visibility into how things are produced. So that we can, even for the things that we can't see, we can still express our values in the things that we buy. And you'd say, it sounds kind of vague, Douglas. Sounds kind of ethereal and well-meaning, but how would that actually look? Well, actually, it already exists. There's all kinds of mechanisms, from fair trade to direct trade, that actually are designed to help you have greater visibility into the food you buy. And I only have a few minutes left, so I'll explain the difference between fair trade and direct trade. Fair trade was a mechanism that was created to ensure that farmers growing coffee or bananas didn't get ripped off in the international marketplace. That they were guaranteed what's called a price floor, a guaranteed price for what they produced. But by forming these, let's call them cooperatives, they also had another extremely amazing benefit, which was that if anything went above that price floor, that went into a common pool, and then all of those growers could decide what to do with that money, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build trauma centers in their community. So this idea of fair trade, while it's totally imperfect, is one mechanism that you can use as a consumer to actually have an opportunity to actually buy things that are closer to your values. Direct trade is food producers who said, you know what, fair trade's not good enough. I have all these other values. You need to be a land steward. You need to be a water steward. You need to pay your workers a healthy wage. You need to support women in the workforce in these communities and support equity. And so whenever you see direct trade in a package, it's worth actually picking up the package because they will explain to you what their values are that they demand of the people that they source from, that you can support as a consumer. I usually talk for a lot longer, but I gave Lisa and Nan, if I could just want to congratulate you guys for an amazing week. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you. I told Lisa that having lived for many years in Italy, the hand gestures of Italians are always amazing. They express so much, right? You can sit across the room and see two people talking, and you already know what they're talking about, even if you can't even hear them. And there's a jest that the Italians use when somebody's talked too long. And so don't show this to your children because then they'll torture you. But it's basically this, which is, you've talked so long, I've grown a beard. So Lisa, for the past 5 minutes, has been growing a beard. So I'll just leave you with this one thought. Saul, back in biblical times, went on the road to Damascus to kill Christians. And along that route, he had an epiphany, a life-changing event, a shattering, earth-moving event that actually turned him from a person seeking out his enemy to a person who actually joined with his enemy. It was an event that altered the course of his life. We all have them. Like, I don't really believe in luck. I think people who talk about luck don't understand luck. People who have good things happen to them in life are people that are aware of opportunities that constantly present themselves, and they take advantage of them. So we all have road to Damascus moments. Most of them we miss. So I would like to leave you with this. What will it take for you to actually be a person who shops and buys and supports a value-based food system? Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. And I just thought people here might like to know that there is a right to know movement around GMOs. When I'm mistaken, it's called RTK. And if you just Google RTK, you'll find a lot of information about next.
So to get more information about GMOs, just Google RTA, which is RTK, right to know. Okay.
There's another side, millions against Monsanto.
I'm sorry?
Millions against Monsanto.
Millions against Monsanto. Okay. Great. Yes.
Thank you very much. I wonder if you know that you're in the birthplace of the processed food industry, essentially.
I had no idea. Really? Here?
And part of the story is interesting. I've had to lead tours down by a riverfront, which has been abandoned because
Yeah.
technology is obsolete. But they found a way to make the normal wheat that grows up here white and pure.
Yeah.
And that led to some amazing things. We're 5 miles from General Mills, which has started to buy up organic food companies
Yeah.
and started to change some of the ingredients in its packaging. So thank you for promoting it.
Listen, I'm not here to, I usually never talk about Monsanto. I kind of thought I would because I was here today. I usually don't, because our project is only about solutions, so what does Monsanto have to do with solution, right? But at the same time, I'm not an idiot. You're not really going to change a food system by agitating a bunch of people to buy organic peas. You're going to also change the food system by speaking directly with the companies that actually make our food and helping them to find ways. I always think that, companies are run by people. And I can't just assume that somebody who works at a large food company doesn't have the same value system that I do. But I feel like they're all captains of the Exxon Valdez that takes 5 minutes to slow down and takes 5 miles to turn around. So I appreciate the difficulty of anybody working at a large food company and the challenges they face. And I will tell you, I'm in conversations with people at many food companies because I recognize what their challenges are, and I try to offer insights that can help them greater understand how they can introduce a different way of looking at the world, one that is based more on values and less on the cheapest possible food system that we can have. Yes? Right. So what you mentioned, I was going to go into about distribution, which actually is one of the keys to this whole thing, but we didn't have time. She mentioned buying organic eggs at Costco versus buying organic eggs at a co-op. So first of all, the largest retailer of organic food in the United States is Costco. The second largest is Walmart. And I find it really important to support both those companies because people only walk in the door at Costco with one word lacerated on their frontal lobe, which is cheap, right? You can get 12 cans of tuna for $4 or something, right? The same thing with Walmart. You know, people are going there because of this idea of cheap. But you know, I think we all know in this room that only a few generations ago we spent 30% of our income on food. 30%. Now it's like 7 or 8, right? So now it's very hard to get people to understand. They'd say, well, food would be so expensive if we bought it was organic. It'd actually be closer to the real price of what it was, to tell you the truth. But to answer your question, support Costco in this amazing education process they're doing for consumers. But support that co-op. Because not only are they selling organic eggs, but they're selling a whole host of other things that are at prices that are being supported by you coming to buy those eggs. So there's arguments to be made for both of them. Yes? Right.
And it's kind of a similar concept to what you're doing because, you know, most of us would say that the most important thing for our kids is to be happy and healthy.
Yeah.
Yet, you know, we ask ourselves the same question, you know, is our behavior purchasing food and supporting reflective of that? And the answer for most of us is maybe somewhat, but a lot of us is
Listen, I'm not saying that kindergartners are smarter than the people in this room. But when I had a room full of kindergartners and we talked about it was this amazing conversation. I showed a film called The Story of the Egg, which explains industrial farming. I had one kindergartner gripping my leg the entire time the film was going. But afterwards, we talked about it. We said, you know, which chickens are happier? The ones that are outside getting crazy and flapping, going crazy. And I said, well, how about the other ones? Oh, they're not happy. They're inside of that thing, and they're all, you know, smushed together. And I said, well, you know, they're both producing eggs. So which egg would you want to eat? The egg that was the product of the energy of that happy chicken, that carries with it that energy from the chicken, or the egg that's in this really confined environment? So obviously, you know, these kids not only chose, you know, the happy chicken, but then what we did with fourth graders, they ended up drawing pictures of those chickens. So we all know that we're in a rigged, cheap food system that's giving us crappy food that's not good for us. And sometimes we just gloss over it and we just don't think about it, but it's definitely on the front of the mind of many of the children that attend the school after this week. Yes, you had a question?
Yes, thank you for coming to speak to the students and to us. And I'm wondering, has your visit here changed the Blake kitchen or the production?
So I'm going to give you a really simple answer to that. That's not my role. My role is to put a range of opportunities out there, and then people who are presented with those range of opportunities are going to choose the one that they can do first, which is always the biggest step. We were doing an art project with students here, and I got them to make an image that would explain their vision of sustainability. And they all looked at me. But 20 minutes later, every single thing was full, and I went around them and I asked them about the project, how it was, and he said, the hardest thing was to start. Okay? So I just put ideas out there, and then I leave it up to people to choose the ones that they can start with that are approachable for them. Are there any other questions? Yes, way in the back.
You did nothing with a dilemma that I had in my own mind about this topic. I'm under the impression that the world is really on the brink of mass starvation. The population of the planet is just increasing exponentially, and it seems like we're just barely producing enough food to feed people, and if there's any massive disruption in the food system, there's going to be massive starvation. So am I wrong about that, or maybe at the point of saying, if
Yeah. So it's a question of, are we able to feed the world in the face of, potential mass starvation in the future? We haven't actually hit the crisis point. It's going to be about 5 years from now. And that's when the Chinese middle class starts eating hamburgers, right? Then we're going to be really in trouble because there's not enough beef on the planet or land to raise that beef. But also, I don't really fault American farmers. How can you fault them? We asked them to do something very Herculean, like feed the world, become the best food producers on the planet. And they have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. And they are growing what we incentivize them to grow. But we're incentivizing them to grow the wrong things, An average acre growing corn might yield that farmer $800 for that acre. But if you grew a diversified system of different foods, you might make $7,000 to $8,000 per acre. So the entire system is designed to get people to grow the wrong things. How could I stand up here and say that farmers are at fault for anything? They're not. They're doing the best that they can, growing what they're being told to grow. But if we were to rethink how we grew things, we'd have a much different food system. It would surprise you to know that the majority of the world is fed from small plot farmers and family farms. It's actually not fed by our industrial food system. This idea that GMOs are increasing crop yields is absolute rubbish. This industrial food system and the GMOs that we're creating are actually not intended to feed the world. They're intended to deliver glyphosates and to build up intellectual property rights for plant life that should be in the public domain. Thank you very much for having me here today.
That was really great. Thank you. Thank you ever so much.
Say, Douglas, before you go, I'm really hoping that this gift we have for you did not come from an oil-based product, and that it was natural wool from some Australian sheep. But anyway, it will keep you warm, I'm sure. So, from us to you, thank you. I really encourage you to seek out Douglas's books. I have had a lot of fun. I'm hoping that I still have a job when I go to work this one, because I went to the library yesterday and got out one of his books called Slow, Life in a Tuscan Town. And like these pictures here that you see, his books have these pictures, and they're really fun because you read the big words and then you have to read. And so I'm sitting in the library yesterday like this with the book upside down, and I looked over the book and it was upside